Um, let's start with introductions. My name is Jamie Gleason, and I'm excited to be with you this afternoon. I have a couple of great friends and colleagues here with me, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a moment. But first, let's give the preamble to this session. Last week, Capture Higher Ed hosted a webinar that was purposed on transfer enrollment and what it's looking like in this environment to grow the transfer population, not only that you had in the pool, but also those transfers that might now be looking at what you are offering in this season. So with that, we wanted to do, so first of all, we guard your time. So we really appreciated the half an hour that you gave to us, but there were some questions following the webinar that we wanted to address. So we decided to try out, this is a true test of YouTube Live. And we are going to be taking the questions from the webinar and addressing them here in a live format. I have colleagues and friends here to join me in that process, but let me tell you who I am. Jamie Gleason, Director of Undergraduate Initiatives at Capture Higher Ed. I'm coming to you live from Philadelphia, where the weather at this point is nice. It seems like the signal's good, so we're ready to rock and roll. So I'm going to hand it over to Anne to introduce herself.
Good afternoon. I had to check the clock to make sure it was afternoon. It is afternoon. Anne Freihofer, title is Senior Enrollment Solutions Consultant, which is a very kind way of referring to outside sales. So I have the pleasure of working with all of you in the capacity of understanding your needs, trying to figure out some of those solutions for the past 8 years with my good friends, Jamie and Jack. Jack, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. Good to see you, and I guess good to be seen, right, Jamie? Because we only get to talk to people, right, through the podcast, through the buzz. So it's nice to be with everybody live, and I'm so glad that you're with us. And I kind of feel like I'm crashing your party this time because you were Jamie's co-host last week for the webinar. So I, like many people, watched that, guys, and so kudos to you because I thought it was great content. And I'm glad to see that we have a whole bunch of questions that have come in about it. And I should point out to folks who are joining us that I have the privilege of moderating your live chat. So by all means, feel free to send in all the questions you possibly can. And we will add to the questions that we got from the webinar. I am coming to you also from Philadelphia. Though properly socially distanced from my good friend, Jamie Gleason. And also I am basically the bizarro Jamie. I am Director of Graduate and Post-Traditional Initiatives for Capture. Welcome, everybody.
All right, so before we get started, what I was hoping to do today, and for those of you who were on the webinar, this will be a very quick Cliff Notes version of what we covered. Let's see if I can get my slide to advance. So we went through essentially 5 tips for Transfer 20. Obviously, we all know the context that surrounds the situation we're in currently. We understand that there's a lot of things that are changing. So as with all types of times where you need to be counseled and change and things like that, first thing we wanted to talk about is embracing that transition. Recognizing what we're in, the water that we're in right now, the kind of the changing tide that's happening, but then also really embracing it for the opportunity that it is. As I have been, thinking about this more and more, obviously we've all had a lot of time to think. We've had a lot of time to kind of ruminate on the potential possibilities that are out there in the enrollment world, but there are a lot of opportunities in the situation that we're in right now that may become standard opportunities to the future, or they may not ever happen again. So this is a kind of a unique moment. I keep telling my kids, like, just remember this time because it is the you're going to remember this, as a point in history. This is a very unique instance. Reduce the friction on your campus. We all know transfers have a set of roadblocks, as do any group of students. So as much as possible within your locus of control, reduce the frictions, the friction that presents itself, whether it's scholarships or transfer credits or even the process. If there's things that you can change in the short term in order to boost your enrollment, then do that. Boost your pool. the premise of all the transfer work that we had been working on here at Capture since the fall, because we all know that, you know, while fall is an important time to build your pool, spring is really the time to deploy, you know, the time to change things. So we'd been working all fall to address and move forward with the NACAC changes that were a part of the situation. And then COVID became a kind of the second ripple. And as a result of that, we have some opportunities to boost the pool. So we talked about what are the things that we can do to augment that pool, given some of the changes. Amplify the reach, recognizing that within transfer marketing opportunities, there has been a change. There's a transition that's happened. We've gone from, you know, a situation where GeoIP targeting on campus is no longer an effective option because there's no one on campus to be GeoIP targeted to. So what does that pivot look like? How do we amplify that reach? What are the things we can do? How do we reach the students where they are, and also the influencers in order to be effective come September? And then also being strategic, you know, not just throwing things out there. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later on, you know, flooding the gates with emails and text messages and just overwhelming students, but like really being strategic about what we're doing. So that's the backdrop of the webinar that we hosted last week. And really it's the preface to the questions that we're going to handle here now. So as we get into this, I'm sorry, I'm looking over at my screen and maybe it's just my view is frozen on YouTube. So hopefully that's not the experience of the rest of our viewers. So if someone can confirm or deny that, then that's fine. We're just going to keep going like it's not happening. We're just going to keep going.
YouTube is working just fine.
Is it? Perfect. There we go. It's
all
just
right.
my connection. I made all that, like, you know, I made the statements about connectivity and then this happened. So go figure.
All dramatic, Jamie.
Yeah, I know. All right. I'm going to be quiet now.
Let's address some questions. And I love these questions. One of the things that I am telling you right now that I'm missing the most about spring is the opportunity to interact with all of you at conferences. So roundtables, breakfasts, bocce ball, all of those things that we get to do together during the spring and kind of talk about what's going on. Today, we are testing how we can do that via YouTube. So let's take a question from the audience. Wendy in Tennessee. Jamie, Wendy would like to know how many unique hits are counted in page views?
Sure. So I'm going to provide context for all of these questions because I think it's important to just make sure that people remember where it came from. So here's the slide that probably brought on that question. You'll notice that within these two dynamic content pieces that we have up, there's a reference to the 429 million pages, tracked page views. And then that is the item that basically spurs the question. So it's a great question because, yeah, here we go. It's a great question because what we do at Capture is obviously we put our participants into buckets, so to speak. You know, we have an identified group of users, and then we have an anonymous group of users, and then there's, you know, those are the real, you know, the two buckets, but then we quantify their page clicks and views according to that. So here's some statistics. The short answer is how many unique how many unique hits are counted in page views? The answer is for every page view, it is a unique hit, but not by a unique individual. So let me put some flesh on that. Let's say Jack Klett goes to jefferson.edu, clicks on the home page, then clicks on the financial aid homepage, and then goes back to the .edu homepage. That is actually considered 3 page views. Jack is only one unique person, but within that, there are actually 2 unique pages that are viewed, but it's counted as 3 page views in total because that's the aggregated amount by Jack. If you look at our track record here that I put, we have collectively, we've watched a lot of activity. I mean, like I get overwhelmed. And let me just also say, this is looking at our current partners right now. So this doesn't look at partners who no longer work with Capture or partners who are, you know, working with us, but on a different, you know, different level. This is only the ones that we're tracking their website activity right now. And also another big caveat is that typically what we track is admissions and enrollment related URLs. So there's more tracking that could happen. That's not always the case, but So we've seen over 100 or over 1 million unique identified visitors. So we've known these students are here. We've watched them track to those 12 million visits, 42 overall page views. So those 1 million people have viewed on average 42 pages, the identified. And then below in the second set of bullets is really the anonymous visitors, or actually the combined group of anonymous and identified, going to that final number at the bottom of 429, which gets us right back to the beginning of the question. Hopefully, Wendy, that takes care, that satisfies the answer. But I will say, hopefully you still have my email address from the webinar. If that doesn't, if there's more questions related to that, then feel free to shoot me an email or drop a comment right now in the chat box if you're watching now. Anything else to add that I missed there, guys?
Hey, Jamie, something that I would just like to mention is that, we have, because of the way that we are able to measure these virtual engagements, we're able to do that not only for specific institutions, but also we're able to glean data across, in aggregate, right, across all of our partners. And this kind of reminds me of a slide that you had in the webinar where you talked about predictions versus actual virtual engagement, and you refer to them as one being like predictions, like a predictive model being potential energy, and the other, the actual the real-time web engagement, as being like kinetic energy, right? That's
Sure.
kind of real-time activity. And I know we're going to get into this maybe a little bit later when we talk about some of the things that we're actually able to see, because I think when you do take a look at what we're able to see in aggregate in terms of these web engagements, it does inform what the market response, what the prospective student response has been to what we're experiencing right now with COVID-19.
Jamie, the only thing that I would say to that is, as folks are having conversations on their campuses, you're probably using Google Analytics of some kind. There is some kind of tracking tool that likely already exists in your web environment. What a great way to ask questions of the folks that are on that side of the house. We get really specific in the difference between identified and anonymous, just that ability to tie it into the CRM so we can report on the who. But in general, I think this is one of those conversations that folks should start having that maybe they've not before, or been intimidated by all of this web activity and what does it mean. In general, I think these are great ways to build bridges between departments on campus.
Yeah, no, that's a real point. That's a good one. And also, I mean, it's really interesting, and I won't go into down the survey rabbit hole, but I feel like as we've all seen, the plethora of surveys that are out there, there are so many interesting statistics about where students and parents are actually going to see those page views, like what material right now is most appetizing, so to speak, and being consumed by the viewers. And I think that this is really a very interesting dialogue when it comes to so many different levels, but really understanding, where are those users going? Where do the resources for our development need to be when it comes to our website and the changes that might need to be made and things like that? How do we make it more user friendly? Like having these page views and accounts, if you're not using Google Analytics, you should do that. But understanding the precise material and user level material is just such a game changer. So yes, great question. Thanks, Wendy, for asking that.
Hey guys, before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to ask a question of those who are with us live, and that would be, what are you seeing in terms of your engagements, right? We're noticing increases in terms of the measurements of virtual engagements, web-based engagements. We also have some interesting data as it relates to email usage and digital advertising click-throughs. I'm sure those of you that are here with us are doing all types of things to provide for outreach to your prospective students, to those in your pool. So I would love to know what you're seeing, if you're seeing any type of increases and through the various channels that you're utilizing to interact with prospective students. So it doesn't need to always be a question. Feel free to hop on into the chat and let us know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great point, Jack. Thank you.
All right. Wendy, 2 gold stars. Wendy in Tennessee, question number 2. What is the rate of application through enrollment from page views? Jamie, I'm sure you remember this question, and Jack, quite a bit from your time on the account management side. How is our funnel converting? So let's give Wendy some information surrounding how we've seen web activity for page views convert applications.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a great question because it really points back to ROI, right? Is what you're doing, is the consumption that's taking place on your website ultimately moving those students through the pipeline like you want them to. So as I referred to earlier, a lot of the pages that we track and a lot of the efforts that we make are really enrollment focused. We don't need to be in, necessarily, unless you're working on the advancement side of our product, in the advancement tools or the alumni section of the website or places like that. We're not on the HR page and stuff like that displaying content. So what we're ultimately trying to do is drive students through to the next step. Like, are we progressing them through the funnel? And let me make an unabashed pronouncement here that I love our data science team, because they dig this stuff and they like conversion material way more than anyone else. They are so into the details. So what we do by looking again across the board, aggregated totals of the number of page views, what do we see? How do we see that funnel develop? What do we see that conversion look like? And here it is. For the 0 pages, we see a less than 1% application rate. If a student or a user clicks on 1 to 4, then we see them move to 12%. 5 to 9, 21, 10 or more, 42. That's like anyone. I think anything at that 21 or beyond level is a very good rate. Obviously we want to see students consuming the material that's on your website, because that's ultimately answering questions and moving their behavior toward that a point of decision. So either they love it and they keep going, or they don't like it and they abandon. But ultimately you're making the value proposition or the unique selling proposition evident, and they're moving forward, they're consuming more, and ultimately that leads to a higher application rate. It's wonderful. Thank you, data science team, for having the details.
And thank you, Jamie, for the words with friends word. That word you dropped, abrogate. I don't even know. No, something about you're so impressed with our data science team, which I am as well. Word I've never heard before.
Oh, yeah. Well, they are amazing. Brad and John and all the guys that work in that team, they're phenomenal. So actually it was great, because as I was building this slide to answer Wendy's question, I had this really good dialogue where we actually went in, refreshed the data, made sure that it was right. Like all these things that are like the little things that we can take for granted. They made sure, like, hey, before you put that on there, let me just make sure that that's accurate right now. Let's check it out, point in time, and make sure that it's right. So props to John.
Awesome. All right. Kendra in Philadelphia happens to be a location of Capture East. Question number 3, can you clarify what you mean by non-matric? So let's talk a little bit about that, both of you.
Sure. First of all, Jack, let's do a little Philadelphia trivia. What is your favorite place to eat cheesesteaks in Philadelphia?
I am a 4th and South fan. Jim Steaks.
Jim Steaks. There we go.
Right at the corner of 4th and South. It is always underrated compared to Gino's and Pat's. They get all the press. Yeah. But Jim Steaks, that's where it's at.
They love the press. Those guys love the press. All right, so let's give a little context to this slide. There are 2 options that really come to mind when we think of non-matriculant, and these actually are both working definitions on a campus. I wanted to show you the point in the webinar where this came up because it really referred back to some methodologies that are pre-NACAC changes in September and post-NACAC changes even now in the season that we're in right now. So I was referring to the way the traditional transfer pool has been built. And in many ways, it has been kind of a gravity-fed, organic, that I always refer to it as the low volume, high yield model, where there's, it's really hard to pin down a big group at the top, but that they're going to convert well. you have smaller numbers, but they're going to convert better. And using those two, campus visits, clearinghouse data of 2-year schools, that's been the traditional way. And then the non-matric, as I referred to it there, is those students who actually did not come to your institution at all. And in fact, that's the definition that I was thinking of through the entirety of this process, was really students who get to this point where they've applied and been accepted, and then just choose not to move forward for various reasons, whether it's finance, whether it's they didn't complete their application, whatever that reason is. Non-matriculant in my mind was those students who are just, they kind of stall out, or they seek enrollment elsewhere. Look, transitioning here, just by point of reference, if it's a new listener, one of the things that we're now recommending on the capture side is we talk to our partners about transfer populations, and really as it relates to how do I build this pipeline now, post NACAC changes. Our recommendations are really to look at those fall, spring cohorts of the last 2 years, grab those non-matriculating applicants, admits, and also melted deposits. Those students who maybe paid a deposit but got a refund before May 1, or paid a deposit and didn't get a refund but never ended up enrolling. Those are your perfect targets right now, given the changes in the NACAC policies, for building the pipeline. And then we're also going one step further. We all know of circumstances, and I know I can remember from my time as a director, situations where a student would come, they'd visit, they realized that they love the institution, but ultimately they knew that they couldn't get it to work then. So they would, they'd enroll at a 2-year institution, or maybe a place that was closer to home, but this could be an opportunity to really just remind them or keep them warm as they're, maybe thinking about new institutions now that they're done with 2 years or whatever. So bringing in those higher non-matriculated inquiries, reminding them of who you are and the value that you offered them earlier. And then also new lead discovery using some of our proprietary tools of Engage, and also paid social prospecting, which is a lead generation mechanism on social media. Those are really the ways that we were using the term non-matriculated, and it really had to do, like I said, with students who go through the process but never end up enrolling, or never become a quote unquote the butt in the seat.
Yeah, and as we transition to our next question, I just want to remind folks that if you did miss the webinar, like Jamie mentioned, and you're just joining us for this live session, in the chat area, you will see that we have a link to the webinar recording itself. Also in the quick summary at the bottom of the screen, you'll find that link too.
Look at Jack. He's like a regular broadcaster here.
So good at this. You'd think you hadn't been on stage as an academic. Amy in Buffalo, I actually love this question. And this is a couple parts. So you spoke a lot about dynamic content, but what kind of effect is email and text having on students during this time? Is there a point where there is too much contact with students? Sometimes I feel like we are overwhelming students to the point they won't want to talk to us anymore. So Amy, that's such a great question. And I would say that everybody is probably thinking about this in some context. So let's break it into its parts, guys, and start from the top.
Sure. First, let me just show the, this was, I think, part of the slide. We talked a lot about communication, those that were viable and non-viable. So the kind of the transitioning moment between what communication tactics are no longer able to be used, and then this huge plethora of tactics that are now being used actively. And this actually just really shows some of the more of the different digital alternatives to some of those non-viables. Let me go back to the original question, because I think there's a lot here. And Amy, thanks for asking this, because I think this is a great, it's a great question. Jack, what's your take here?
So my first thought on this really kind of comes from the survey data that we've seen. And there have been a lot of surveys. I think Inside Higher Ed or the Chronicle had an article. Basically, it was a survey of the surveys. So, and there's a lot of data out there. But I would say that for the most part, the response on the part of students and their families has been in favor of more information. So we've seen the increases in website visits specific to the information and content being produced to communicate with prospective students at this time. So I don't think that there is a risk of over communication or too much content, provided, and this is the big proviso, right? Provided that the content is relevant, right? So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're actually, you're right on the money there, Jack. I think it's a delicate balance that we have to strike right now, because I'm even thinking of the graphs that I used with, and I held back from using any charts and graphs in this follow-up presentation because I feel like there were so many in the webinar. So if you don't remember them, or if you haven't looked at that slideshow, go back and look at them. But there was one that had a blue chart that showed basically about a 30% increase in screen time. But then also, there was a graph from Verizon that kind of took a week out of mid-March and showed, even phone activity is way up. And I think there's, we all know website activity is now back, it has actually surpassed what it was at last year. But you make a good point, Jack, in that the material has to be relevant. Like the situation that we're in right now, it demands relevant material. Not only demands relevant material about like programmatic, like what are you doing about higher ed, the future of higher ed and your outcomes, but also there's a demand right now for what are you doing for the safety of your community, and how are you going to care for my son or daughter as it relates. I think that the opportunity that presents itself this summer is really one of communication to influencers and really understanding like what does that narrative look like to parents, to people who are, concerned about the future. Maybe even, I would even say I put alumni into that, because I know for my institution, everything that I'm getting from the president or from the director of alumni, I'm consuming it because I have a keen interest in their survival. And I want to know, like, how are they dealing with it? What's the plan? And unfortunately, it is, as you say, Amy, there is this potential of overwhelming the audience with too much. However, the other survey that sticks in my mind is that some of the early ones that came out about like, how satisfied are you? This is a kind of the current student survey of how satisfied are you, or have you been with how your institution has handled the COVID crisis? And I think that, in many of them that I looked at, maybe like 60% were kind of very happy with how it had been, either happy or very happy with how it had been handled. But that leaves, 35%, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, that were not. And I think those are the ones, those are the potential transfer students that we're referring to here that might be like, you know what, I'm just like mad that they handled it this way and I'm looking somewhere else. So I think the pivot, the fulcrum here is, how do you figure out how to communicate to that group in order to provide value and explain, your position? How do you, to a new audience, to an audience that doesn't know you, like what is the methodology and the messaging that makes the most sense, to that kind of brand new audience or that emerging audience that's kind of going to show up in the weeks to come, or maybe is there right now.
Maybe one of the things I've started having a lot of conversations about with institutions, we're hearing a lot from partners and prospective partners, more so than ever, think about your prospective students and even your returning students as the consumers that they are, as the consumers that you are. When you're in a place in which you don't have information, what are you? You're a little bit afraid. This is a moment in which for us, dynamic content does give us the ability to have responsive email and responsive texting. Students and their families who are visiting the website, you as an admissions team can have comfort in knowing that they're going to receive pretty immediate communication, because they went there to ask for it. So I think there's an element of, for capture, dynamic content, which gives us the ability to respond because we can measure the behavior of that reach out. So, something to think about on your campuses, are you making sure you're checking all of the places where phones could be ringing? Where voicemails could be left, where emails could be anonymously sent into inboxes because students just don't know where else to go. So like those are some of the things that I think about. We certainly don't want to overwhelm our students, but I don't know what's worse, being overwhelmed or not having information that you need to make a comfortable. That's tough.
Yeah. Well, and this is actually one of those questions that I used to have a lot when I was the director of admissions, because you get to this point in the summer where you're communicating, you have students who have been either in your pipeline or have emerged but haven't moved forward, and it's like, at what point do we stop? And for me, it was always there's always a cost benefit analysis, right? Like the risk, at some point the risk is so low, either they're not going to come because they're not moving your direction, or they're not going to come because they're overwhelmed. But it's like, I think that there's a point where I'd rather have more information out there that actually classifies and quantifies as like good information, that you're helping students move through that process. And I think this is where the personalization, like you said, Ann, the personalization of that message becomes so critical, so clutch, if I may use my surfer buddy's surfer buddy's word. But it becomes one of those things where personalizing that message and outreach and understanding, hey, what are they needing right now? What are they, as we, as the here in Philadelphia, we're still in very much red areas of the state where things aren't opened up again. As you can see, my hair is as long as it's been in a long time. Like we aren't at that point where, like where Florida and maybe parts of Georgia and Nebraska are opening up. So really understanding, like, contextually, what do the students that might be looking at me, right now, looking at our institution need, might help drive that. Do we send this now, or do we wait a week? When was the last time? And really understanding that cadence. But being, the dynamic content is a real game changer when it comes to that, like being very responsive and automated, so you don't necessarily have to think about it. Jack, I was thinking relative to this question actually too. And sorry, Amy, if this answer is too long, but I think the other part of this is the how students, especially transfer students right now, are actually kind of fit into a different category, right? They're going to be very consumer savvy. They're going to be very much looking at these different points of, what's it going to look like if this. I feel like they're much more kind of like in your zone, Jack, of like the potential buyer in a graduate and an adult or a distance learning model, because of some of the hypotheticals that exist. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think that there will still be transfer students that will fit kind of the typical model of a transfer student who decides to leave and transfer to another institution for any number of reasons. We know that finances are typically among the most cited, though that's always an interesting kind of response to unpack, because is it really finances, or is it the idea of, this has been my experience and I'm not too keen on it so far, and I've been spending a lot of money on it, so therefore financially is the reason, when actually it's more about student experience.
Sure.
So there are a lot of things there that are primary motivators for transfer students to look for another option. Though I think that what this situation has done has, more than ever before, provided parents and students alike the opportunity to truly look at education as a commoditized product. Now, I'm among those who believe that prospective students, and maybe this is because I spent a lot of my time in the adult and graduate market, but prospective students have looked at education as a commodity and as an academic product for quite a long period of time. But I think that in this case, at the undergraduate level, the traditional undergraduate level, these transfer students will be, to use your your word, Jamie, savvy, right? We'll be far more savvy as it relates to finances, as it relates to aid. We'll be far more savvy as it relates to return on that investment. Far more savvy as it relates to career placement and career
Sure.
preparation, and far more savvy as it relates to the concept of academic rigor and what the academic experience is going to be.
Mhm.
And if someone is looking at this from the perspective of, I might go back to campus in the fall, and what I just went through might happen all over again if there's this second wave that some specialists are suggesting there may be. Then what do my options look like closer to home?
Mhm.
So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah. Such an interesting season. Okay, we've reached the end of the questions that we had. I actually thought of one question that I would actually pose to you guys. And this is a question kind of based on some of my history, but just really understanding, like, where we are. And especially, let me put more context around this. Really understanding, like, this macro level pivot that's happened in the last 6 weeks. So here you are, you're an enrollment, you're a VP on campus, or you're a director of admissions, you have charge over a budget. You're getting to the end of the fiscal year, and you have, let me just say, you have $30,000 that's kind of like discretionary in there, whether it's search names that you weren't able to buy, because we know that's happening, or something else that opened up or didn't come through. What do you do in this moment of pivot in order to use that? What would you think to be most effective?
I'm curious. Anne spends a lot of time kind of listening to folks on the ground.
Yeah.
So she's, I think, more actively in tune with what vice presidents are actually thinking, right? Because she gets
Sure.
the questions from vice presidents about what solutions might be available to best help. So Anna, I'm curious, what are you hearing? I mean, what are the top things that VPs are coming to you about? Directors of enrollment, they're coming to you saying, "Hey, we have this amount of money, and we're focused on getting this in return, and we're looking at this type of product." What are you hearing?
So major difference depending on the institution, type of institution. Are we
Sure.
a state or are we a private institution? So are we a state institution that's waiting to figure out what our budgets are going to be slashed to, or do we have a little bit more flexibility there? So I would say those two scenarios require a lot of conversation. Secondly, what I would say in that conversation is questions about personnel. So just sending things, just running another campaign, just buying more names, or trying to find a direct mail piece. What are you hoping to achieve in that notion?
Sure.
Is it better spent being able to have some intelligence, data, technology, a prediction as to who you might want to make those investments in based on a model that's been respec'd? So I think what I'm hearing from our market right now is that the flexibility of tools to be able to take into account an environment that did not exist 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago is critical. I mean, immediately drawn back to things like Common App stuff, or when FAFSA ranking changed. For my time at Capture, those were two moments in which, not having the ranking, being able to submit it early, the Common App in general, those types of changes kind of shook everybody up because things that were systematic that we had relied upon changed. So what I'm hearing institutions are willing to spend money on right now or invest in are things that are going to give them flexibility in the future. If I'm going to make a prediction now and things change in 3 weeks, it's almost kind of like getting LASIK when your eyes are still changing. What's the point? What's the point? You're just going to need correction all over again. So the ability to have flexibility in your tools, whether that's digital, whether that's web-based, whether that's behavioral, definitely tip of the iceberg.
Sure.
Flexibility also in obviously how you're going to deliver that. Are we talking mobile? Are we talking social? Are we talking desktop? We have some institutions who sent students home who are in a really rural environment. So direct mail is the best way to reach those students. You don't want to rule that out. So I am not hearing somebody, you know, or I would say capture right now from a sales perspective isn't hearing just the same thing. It's the flexibility and tools and what can you do to help protect us for the future is what I'm hearing the most of today.
Yeah, I'm going to put myself back in that position and say, okay, well, if I was there, what would I be doing? And I think that all the things that Ann mentioned are spot on. I think that's exactly how I would be thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, rather than LASIK, I would say don't get a hair transplant if you're still losing your hair. So anyway,
I'm not going into that one any more than we need to, right?
I say that because I'm legally blind and I haven't gotten LASIK because my eyes won't stop getting worse, and I'm only going through that once. So that's why that one resonates with me quite a bit.
Yeah. So I would just say that for me, and this will come as no surprise to you too, because I did a whole webinar on it for grad when we were talking about measuring engagement. For me, it comes down to measure, measure, measure. So it is great. There's a lot of content that's being produced and being pushed out to students. We are interacting with students from a content perspective in ways at our campuses. And when I say we, I mean we collectively in higher ed in enrollment operations. We are engaging with students in a way that we potentially never did before, and in ways we never even thought we may do. I give the example of the faculty podcasts that are happening kind of across the country, which humanizes the academic and kind of provides an opportunity for that relationship to cultivate a bit. For me, it's about, we need now to be able to measure, institutions need to be able to measure virtual engagement. If there is no mechanism to measure virtual engagement at the individual student level, then, to use your LASIK analogy, Ann, you are truly flying blind because you cannot measure that kinetic energy that Jamie talked about in the beginning here of this session. You need to be able at the individual student level to understand who is engaged, what content they're engaging with, what messages are resonating with them, and then how do you use that data to inform what your further outreach is so that you can continue to keep that student engaged with you, so that when this does end and we return to campuses, that student is coming back, or you're able to cultivate that relationship with the student who needs that extra influence to progress them through the funnel. And you can only get that if you're able to smartly measure virtual engagement. And that goes beyond click-through rates in digital campaigns. It goes beyond open rates in your CRM. We're talking about really being able to measure the level of engagement of an individual student with your institution via that virtual interface, whatever that virtual interface may be. So that's where I would be focusing my energy.
Great feedback.
Good feedback. I should say you both are right. First of all, you're right in that.
I didn't know that was
I know, twice in one day I said Ann was right. I'm never going to live this one down. I think you're absolutely right in that context is key, right? The type of institution, the goals you have, and even maybe some of the shortfalls that you're looking at right now, I think we're going to drive that. But I think you're absolutely right in that measurement and the ability to pivot again if needed. Because I think that if one thing has been reinforced through this entire experience is that we have been able to pivot out of some, some pretty crazy things. I mean, this is like something we've never experienced before and hopefully never have to, or will have to again. But I think we need to be preparing just in case. Like there's got to be those alternatives of just in case. So I think, I mean, I'm not willing to just like to just say statements like this, but I have been Thrilled to have been a part of this inaugural YouTube live event with the two of you. A reminder for those who are listening, if you haven't yet downloaded the material that we have developed called the Transfer Trilogy, the website right there, the URL on the bottom right of your screen, you can go to that URL to grab this information. We're really excited to be able to just really walk with our partners through this. We all recognize, everyone inside Capture recognizes that this is not an easy experience that we are going through, and we are excited to be on this side of it, helping to make our partners successful. If you listen today and found this to be helpful, we're kind of toying with the idea of using this as a format for follow-up from our webinars. If you liked it, if there are things you didn't like about it, we're thick-skinned people, especially Jack and I, we're from Philadelphia. We would take your honest feedback in the comments section, or if you want to just email them to us at info@capturehighered.com, that will get to us eventually. We're really thankful for the time that you gave us today. Hopefully we've answered questions that you had, and if not, feel free to get in touch with us.
Jamie, this has been awesome. Thanks for asking me to be here. You too, Anne. Thanks for letting me crash your party. And I would say that also we are encouraging folks that if they would like to talk to us a little bit more deeply, feel free to contact us at capture.buzz/contact us. And if you're in Philadelphia, Anne, I don't know if you did this or not, but if you're in Philadelphia, even if it's just for like 2 hours before you have to get on another plane, get yourself a gym steak.
So I haven't done gym steak. Reading Market's my place.
Reading Market. It's okay though.
I mean, first of all, you don't have to choose just cheesesteak. There's like every.
Oh my word. Overwhelming food choices there.
I need more than 2 hours. Great place for an overnight. So
yes.
Well, it's wonderful to see you, gentlemen. Thanks for letting me be a part of this as well. And looking forward to doing some more of it since we can't be together. That's the next best thing.
All right. Be safe, everyone.
Bye. See you all.